scattered out because Ahtna people have always been nomadic to follow the game and so forth. So we're kind of scattered here and there, and we didn't congregate into one big community because there's not enough game nearby to support a lot of people. So people were kind of scattered out.
Ahtna's traditional territory covers millions of acres in south central Alaska. Ahtna people have existed in the region for thousands of years. During this time, they made the most of the resources in every corner of this large expanse.
The Atna traditional territory is huge. It extends all the way from Cantwell on the Parks Highway all the way across to the Copper River, and then includes all of the Wrangell Mountains as well. It's an extensive area that was used by Ahtna. Every place was used. I don't think there was a place that people hadn't visited or used before.
Throughout the Ahtna people's history, they developed customary and traditional hunting and fishing practices that were a part of their daily lives and were central to their culture.
So all of the land is a part of the fabric of not only their culture but their society and their sense of who they are.
They all talked native. They all understood how to get game the native way. The native way, in a lot of respects, is similar to how people get their moose today. But you got to learn so many things in native way, and they understood it because they grew up hearing the stories and all that.
As far back as I can remember, it's always been a priority, for our people.
I know for sure that I was impressed how much these elders knew how to survive. I watched them make snowshoes, I watched them make fish traps, make fish wheels, and knew how to snag salmon, whatever.
Even today's elders remember a time when customary and traditional practices were commonplace and a regular part of living and surviving in the Ahtna region.
It was, survival, really. It was, and then we knew that. We knew we had to get it, or else we wouldn't eat that winter. So it was important.
Well, in them days, it was a big part of our life. Gathering food and stuff was for our survival. We didn't have money in them days, and we didn't have grocery stores out there. So living off the land was the way we made it.
We ate subsistence food every day.
And that was a year-round affair. Trapping in the winter, hunting in the fall. They taught me when the game was best to harvest and eat, so we wouldn't waste any of the meat.
So that's a big difference nowadays than what was back then, they just took what they need.
Their memories of their introduction to customary and traditional are still strong.
And then when I was 14, I got to go hunting for caribou and moose. In fact, I got my first caribou when I was 14. And under our tradition, Ahtna's tradition, I had to give that caribou away to my relatives.
Since I was young, but 10 years old, I start little game all the time, go around in the woods. And when I get in my 15, I start to hunt, get moose, bear, and hunt sheep. I've been doing this all the time.
And that sparked my interest in sharing with the people. Whenever I get game, moose, caribou, or whatever, I always share with my relatives or friends. And that was our tradition.
The Ahtna people governed themselves under a very defined clan system that included laws and regulations. Their customary and traditional ways and values sustained them.
So the Ahtna managed their behavior. They didn't manage the fishery or the fish. They didn't manage the animals. They managed their attitudes and their behaviors and their actions towards the animals. And that's how they believed that the animals kept up in numbers, because they respected those animals and they treated them correctly, and they were abundant because of the Ahtna's actions and thoughts towards these animals.
The funny thing is that non-natives said we were poor.
But to us, we were never poor. We were rich in our own way.
So we were taught respect of the land, respect of elders, respect of people.
It was a strict culture because they believed that animals had a lot of power, an enormous amount of power, and that if they didn't follow the rules, the animals would come back, because they were totally abjectly dependent on these animals. If they didn't have those animals, there wouldn't be any Ahtna at all. They had to figure out how to coexist with it.
I was Atna Kostan. I come from Atna people, Atna Dene. That means people of the river here.
The big change is just that we were restricted from living our way of life. It was really devastating for Native people. It just made you feel terrible that you can't live the way your ancestors lived for thousands of years.
And that made it really difficult for our people, especially the elders, because they didn't understand rules and regulations. They were used to just knowing when the season was time to go get the moose and caribou, and how many they needed, and how much fish.
There's been an impact on those who bridge the past and the present.
It just hurts my heart. Even we say that the other day, is that what do you think the elders would have said about what is happening today? They're starving us out.
They've always told me that the times would change because of the road system. They had to move from their villages closer to the road system because it transitioned into a monetary system.
It just kind of amazed me that I felt what our elders said a long time ago. I felt their grief because of what's happening to our lands, and by these changes.
Even though we are working to improve it, Ahtna's relationship with the state government of Alaska has been challenging.
The government doesn't understand the culture, and so it makes them hard to understand what we're trying to say.
We don't hunt for sports. We don't hunt for, to show off. We hunt to feed our people.
When they passed the Land Claim Settlement Act, it's a law that they're supposed to provide our customary and traditional. They don't recognize us as tribes. They just ignore it, completely ignore it.
We don't know what they're going to do. They never tell us nothing. You don't even have a meeting with them. You just take it.
Attempts at being a part of the state's process have only been marginally successful.
No, they've danced all around it. They wouldn't admit that we should have self-determination. They think that they should control us.
Because the non-natives far outnumber the native people, they get to appoint people that they want in places where, like game boards, fish boards, and so forth, where decisions are made on harvest numbers and at a time of the season should open and close and so forth. They make all that determination.
The dual federal-state approach has not been effective.
Having two sets of regulation out there, in the woods, and you don't know where you're at. If you don't have, I told me you need a surveyor and an attorney to be when you go hunting.
In recent years, there was a very successful co-management collaboration.
When I was on the board of directors for Ahtna, was back in 2009, we got the community harvest hunt set up with the Board of Game. We were allocated 100 moose, 300 caribou. That was for 8 villages. So we had to divide it up amongst each village. The first year, it worked really well. We had a very successful hunting season. And then the following year, the state of Alaska said that the Board of Game didn't have the right to give us that hunting opportunity.
A collaboration that was, maybe, too successful.
State of Alaska just made the Board of Game scrap that program, and the state says you will allow anyone in the state to hunt those same 100 moose, those same 300 caribou, and they opened up, there was 2,000 or 3,000 people come into our country and hunt, and they got all the game within less than 4 days. Every year the influx of hunters gets to be greater, and it just is never going to work that way.
Ahtna involvement and self-determination is key to the future of customary and traditional practices.
But our people are trying to let the world know that we are in a bind at the moment. We can't really do our hunting and fishing because of the regulations with the state and the government. Even though some of them have a federal subsistence opportunity out there, we ended up without any federal land, basically, in Ahtna region.
We need to make our own decisions because we know our culture, we know our land, we know our people.
Atna is at the forefront of trying to get a solution to the hunting and fishing rights for Native people. So the whole state of Alaska, all the Native tribes are waiting to see how well Ahtna does.
Trying to continue our subsistence way of life. We would like to do that as much as possible. It's very important for our people not only to put food on the table, but to continue our tradition.
Everybody should learn to hunt, you know. Even if they live in the city, they should know how to hunt.
The legacy of the Ahtna culture will be carried on by the youth of today.
The young people are picking up our language. They're starting languages in Grinnell school this year.
They're getting it more and more today. In the last few years, I've seen it, especially in the last 5 years when they've started making them go to culture camp, and they have a dance group and activities that are programmed towards the younger people to make them understand their culture, where they come from, and to be proud of that.
Understanding the culture is only one part. Actively engaging in it is just as important.
I realized that basically Native people, or at least the Ahtna, do not express their relationship to the land or the animals in any other way but by going out and hunting and fishing and going out on the land. That is the religious expression.
It's a kind of a spiritual thing.
The only way we're going to preserve our culture and our way of life is traditional knowledge. Is by sharing, what you know and what you do. But you can talk about it, but you got to exercise it. You got to get out there and do your own. Learn how to build a fish wheel. Learn how to make fish rack. Learn how to dry meat. Learn how to do those kind of things. And then you will always have something to eat.
It's going out and doing it.
It's impossible to separate Ahtna culture from the land. The two are forever connected.
These people are Ahtna because of where they live and how they live. And so without that, you can say that there won't be an Ahtna culture anymore.
Our land is important to us, our culture, but we are willing to share that with everyone. We don't restrict people coming into our land and stuff. We try to explain to them just to be respectful and enjoy.
I think the general public should know that we are a people, we are a nation.
I can say one thing, I am very proud to be Atna. I am very proud to be from this region.
I'm talking about these people that come into the country that don't understand our way of life, how we grew up. They come in and think, well, the game's there, it's in my mind just as much as it's yours. But they don't know that our culture is tied to, taking of game, and our customary and traditional way of life. It's all tied. Our language is tied to wildlife and fish.
The current laws and regulations affecting Ahtna traditional hunting practices have severely limited the opportunity to maintain these all-important traditions.
No matter how many times a sport hunter goes out there, he's never going to get it, because they weren't born and raised here. Their ancestors didn't die here and aren't buried here.
Of the millions of acres of traditional Ahtna territory, 1.7 million acres were officially conveyed to Ahtna through the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971, which also promised that Alaska Native subsistence rights would be protected.
Right now, Ahtna Inc. has 1.7 million acres out there, and under state regulation, under the ANSCA regulation, all private land is managed by state. And we can't even manage our own fish and game on the land that was selected for subsistence use. Most of our land was selected by, advice from our elders, and we can't even hunt on it. So now we're trying to get where we can regulate our own land that we selected.
The state of Alaska also promised during the passage of ANILCA to manage all lands, state, native, and federal, for a rural subsistence priority. But the voice of the Ahtna people in matters relating to the management of wildlife on their lands has been nearly eliminated. This is completely at odds with the firmly established federal policy of self-determination for Native people.
So we're a minority. Politically, we do have very little influence. The governor appoints people that are from the heavily populated areas to game boards and other boards that benefit, supposed to benefit the rural areas. But they only want benefit for the urban areas where they live.
Any viable solution to the current challenges must involve a spirit of collaboration, a true partnership that includes all vested parties in the region. This is why federal legislation to create a wildlife co-management system has been proposed.
To try to change the system by participating, and that to me is what the Ahtna have chosen to do, and they've chosen to do it over 100 years now.
It's called co-management. We want to manage the wildlife here in this area with the state, because we have wisdom and knowledge of thousands of years.
Ahtna environmental knowledge is valuable and can be used in the management of the resources.
For thousands of years, Ahtna lands have provided for a subsistence-based way of life for its people. The establishment of a unified tribal state federal co-management structure will ensure this way of life continues.
One of the reasons that Native people can be successful in co-management is if they work directly with the federal government, which is willing to have government-to-government relations with Native people.
The majority of the people of Alaska recognize that the original Alaskans here, who are the Alaska Native people, have to be at the table in making decisions about how we can enhance our living here in Alaska.
Through this alliance, all parties will benefit. and the lands of Atna will prosper.